Night in the ICU is a religion of small sounds. Ventilators praying in measured breaths. Pumps counting rosaries of milliliters. Telemetry sketching green constellations across the dark. By 2:09, we had found that fragile hush that happens after the last code and before the first. Dawn Labs, a silence you learn to respect because it's never really silence at all. I was at the glass charting station finishing notes, coffee cooling to the same temperature as the room. Bed 7 was my problem case. Male, late 50s, found down at home after an unknown downtime. Hypoxic, CT perfusion a Rorschach of bad news. Pupils reactive, reflexes intact enough to keep hope legal, but no eye opening, no commands. We'd threaded him onto a ventilator, started the slow choreography, sedation holidays, neurochecks, watching for the twitch of a miracle. Doc? Marta, my charge nurse, leaned around the monitor. Voice kept low because we all whisper at night, even when we don't have to. Bed 7's ET cuff is drifting. Hiss at the mouth. On it, I said, grateful for a task I could touch. I pushed into 7. The room smelled like betadine and plastic, a clean kind of grief. The man lay swollen and still, the ventilator cycling through his borrowed breaths. Condensation ticked down the tube in lazy drops. I palpated the pilot balloon. The cuff was soft. I gave it a careful push of air, listening for the change in music. The hiss tightened, then steadied. Somewhere, a pump chimed the end of its bag. In the corner, the EEG scrawled its indifferent hieroglyphs. I glanced at the face I'd come to know without knowing the man. Bruised along the zygoma, hair matted, half-day beard. He didn't look like anyone I'd met, and that was a comfort. You learn not to find your father or your neighbor or yourself in every patient if you want to last. I started to step back. His lips moved. A glitch, I told myself. Error finding chords. Leak phonation. It happens. The tube framed his mouth in an ugly oval, skin blanching where the tape bit. The ventilator sighed again, and the lips shaped around it, cobbling sound out of pressure and accident, except what came out wasn't a grunt, or a cough, or a nothing. It was a word. 2 syllables. Soft, intimate, impossible. Bug. I froze so hard my knees locked. No one in this hospital called me that. No one in my life had called me that since I was 9. It had been my grandfather's word, then my father's. A nickname that stuck like sap all through the era of skinned knees and wooden swords. It died the summer my father didn't come back from the night shift. We buried the word with him because my mother couldn't bear it. Bug, the patient whispered again, clearer, as the cuff leak sang at exactly the right angle. The consonant rode the exhalation like it had trained for this. Something cold ran from my scalp to my heels and pooled there. The room tilted a degree, just enough to make the machines look like cliffs. Doctor? Marta's voice from the doorway, careful, seeing something had changed. Everything okay? I found my voice where I'd dropped it. Cuff leak, I said, too quickly. Just noise. The patient didn't open his eyes. He didn't so much as twitch. But the ventilator cycled, and the mouth opened, and my borrowed past came out in a stranger's breath. Bug, he said, and then, don't leave the door open. My throat closed around old air. The phrase was a stone skipped across years our back porch. June heat, me darting in and out with a jar of fireflies. My father smiling without looking up from the newspaper. Don't leave the door open, Bug. You'll let the night in. I had never told anyone that sentence existed. Why would I? It was just a small, warm thing that had cooled in storage with all the others. I leaned in until my reflection fractured across the ventilator's plastic. Can you hear me? I asked the Coma, because you never stop trying. Squeeze my hand if you can hear me. Nothing. The EEG continued its tired cursive. The oxygen saturation held at 94, like it had made a promise. I should have left then documented phonation with leak, written a note about sedation titration, something rational to cover the irrational. Instead, I stood there counting each breath, like a thief cataloging a house he once lived in. Outside, thunder rolled over the roof. The hospital shivered the way old buildings do, as if remembering its own storms. The ventilator dipped, rose, dipped again, a lullaby for the unlucky. His lips parted. "Bug," he breathed, and this time he added a third syllable that cut like a splinter. My surname, tucked behind the nickname, the way my father used to say it when he was proud and pretending not to be. The monitor caught my spike in heart rate and tattled to the room. I put 2 fingers to my own pulse, like a rookie to pretend I was checking his. I could feel the tremor in my hands through the glove. "Who are you?" I whispered, because no one else was listening. The ventilator exhaled. A cuff hiss shaped itself around the vowel and made a word of it. "Home," the patient said. The lights flickered, once not a power blip, more like the room blinking. When they steadied, the glass of the door had caught a smear of condensation from my own breath. In it, as the fog faded, a child's crooked fingerprint line appeared and vanished. I stepped back out into the hall, because that's what you do when a room starts to feel like a throat. Marta raised an eyebrow. I gave her a professional nod I didn't feel. "Anything else?" she asked. "Just tighten the tape later," I said. "And keep an eye on him." "As if we don't," she said, but she was already glancing at bed 7, like she'd heard the tremor in my voice. I returned to the charting station and tried to drown in dictation. The words marched across the screen obediently. GCS, FIO, PEEP, target map, numbers behaving. Medicine is a language you hide inside until the storm passes. At 2:17, the ventilator in 7 sighed in a different key. It wasn't louder. It was closer, even with the door closed. I looked up. On the monitor above his bed, the respiratory rate counter ticked from 14 to 13 to 12, settling into a rhythm I knew from inside my ribs. And from beyond the glass, too soft for anyone else, the coma used my father's mouthpiece again. "Bug," it said. "Let me in." I told myself not to look, that if I kept my eyes on the screen, if I let the language of numbers wrap around me, it would pass. Numbers are neutral, and neutrality is oxygen when the night tries to choke you. But my gaze betrayed me. It slid to bed 7. The ventilator's bellows lifted and fell with steady patience, but the sound was wrong, too close, too deliberate. Each exhale rattled faintly, like a voice warming its throat. His lips twitched around the tube, slack yet shaping. "Bug." My pulse jumped. I pressed the charting pen so hard it nearly snapped. I wanted to stand, to walk in, to prove it was only cuff leak, but my legs stayed nailed under the desk. "Doctor?" Marta's voice cut the silence. She was restocking meds at the Pyxis, back turned but listening. "You okay? You look pale." I cleared my throat. "Fine, just tired." She glanced over her shoulder, unconvinced, but didn't push. I turned back to my notes, tried to force myself into dictation. "Patient remains comatose, ventilated, sedation stable." The words blurred. My hand shook. The intercom above my head crackled. Static hissed for a beat, then died. No page, no announcement. Just enough to remind me the hospital has ears. Then bed 7's alarms chirped. High pressure. I was on my feet instantly, grateful for something real to fix. I pulled open the glass door and stepped inside. The room was cold, air heavy with that sterile chill machines seemed to exhale. The vent whined against resistance, bellows straining. I leaned in, checked the tubing for kinks. Nothing. Checked the cuff again, still sealed. The patient's chest rose hard, strained against the ventilator. His eyelids fluttered. For a second, I thought he'd open them, but no, just a twitch. I moved closer, stethoscope in hand, and then I heard it. Not through the tube this time, not shaped by a leak. It came from inside his throat, a whisper dragged raw over cords that shouldn't have been awake. "Don't leave the door open." The stethoscope slid from my hand and clattered to the floor. My knees nearly followed. Because those weren't just words. They were a memory. My memory. The porch door, summer night, fireflies escaping from the jar I'd caught. My father's voice behind me, half stern, half amused. "Don't leave the door open, Mug. You'll let the night in." The same phrase I'd just heard in this room. The monitor beeped, catching my racing pulse like a tattletale. I bent low, close enough that the patient's breath warmed my ear through the hiss of the vent. "Who told you that?" I whispered. His lips parted. No tremor, no twitch, just certainty. "Dad." The room tilted. For a second, I wasn't sure if I was still standing. My father had been in the ground for 30 years. And yet here he was, breathing through a stranger, calling me by the name only he had ever used. I stumbled back against the counter, palms slick in my gloves. The ventilator hummed on as if nothing had happened. The patient's vitals scrolled steady across the monitor, heart rate 82, sat 95%, BP holding, but I didn't believe a single number anymore. "Dad," I whispered, testing the word in the cold air. It felt like gravel in my mouth. The patient didn't move, didn't stir. But his lips parted again, slack over the tube, and another phrase slipped through, faint, wheezing, but sharp enough to cut. "Basement, the jar." I froze, my throat locked. There was no reason, no earthly reason, for him to know that memory. I was 7 years old, sneaking into the basement to hide a jar of lightning bugs. I thought I could keep alive forever. The smell of damp cement, the hum of the freezer, the way my father's footsteps thundered down after me when he found the door ajar. He'd laughed at first. Then he'd knelt, his rough hand on my shoulder, and told me things die when you keep them in the dark, that it was better to let them go. It was one of those tiny, quiet moments you never tell anyone. One you almost forget until it comes back to haunt you 30 years later through the throat of a comatose stranger. I staggered forward, gripping the bed rail like it could anchor me. "How do you know that?" No answer. Just the steady inhale-exhale, the mechanical tide of the ventilator. I leaned closer, heart pounding so hard, swore the monitor was tracking me, not him. "What do you want from me?" This time the voice came stronger, carrying weight, bending the hiss of air into command. "Confess." The monitors blipped in unison. Not just his every patient in the ICU. 12 beds, 12 screens, heart rates and rhythms jagging into the same word, spelled out in green phosphor. Bug. The intercom crackled again, louder, static chewing the edges of silence. A single breathless phrase leaked through the speakers, deep and distorted. "Don't leave the door open." The lights flickered, one bulb popping in the corner with a snap. The air thickened, humming, as if the whole unit was holding its breath. I spun toward the glass. Marta was outside, staring in, her hand frozen mid-motion with a chart. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear her through the glass. Couldn't hear anything but the chorus of machines, all spelling the same impossible word. "Bug, bug." And then the patient's eyes opened cloudy, gray, but locked straight on mine. "You left it open," he whispered. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. His cloudy eyes fixed me in place, unblinking, as if they saw through 30 years of walls I had built. "You left it open," he repeated, voice leaking through the tube in a rasp that didn't belong to this body. I shook my head, words spilling without thought. No, I shut it. I did. I swear." The memory clawed its way up anyway. The back porch door. Summer thunder on the horizon. Me, 9 years old, sprinting inside with a jar of fireflies. Slamming the door carelessly behind me. My father's voice sharp, cutting the night like a whip. "Bug, don't leave the door open. You'll let the dark in." It had been such a small thing. A warning, a joke, but tonight it felt like prophecy. The monitor screamed, all 12 beds surging into arrhythmias at once, before settling, eerily synchronized, to my own racing pulse. Lines jagged and dipped, spelling letters I didn't want to see. DNIE, intercom buzzed. Marta's voice finally broke through, sharp and urgent. "Doctor." All the beds just alarmed at once. What's happening in there? I snapped my head toward the glass. Marta stood frozen, her eyes darting between me and the monitors. She could see it. She could see what I was seeing. Her mouth fell open. She lifted a trembling hand and pointed not at me, but at bed 7. I turned back. The patient's body hadn't moved, but the condensation on the ventilator tubing had. It streaked downward in careful trails, forming crude letters against the plastic. "Bug." Marta's muffled shout came through the glass. "Doctor," he spelled it. Her words punched a hole straight through my denial. I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't overtired. She saw it too. I pressed closer to the bed, hands shaking on the rail. My voice dropped to a whisper only he and the machines could hear. "What do you want from me?" His lips twitched around the tube, shaping words like they had practiced for decades. "Confess." The lights overhead flickered, buzzing louder, and for an instant the entire ICU was plunged into shadow. When the fluorescence blinked back on, Marta was no longer at the glass. She was inside the room, at the patient's bedside. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and her lips moved in perfect unison with his. "Confess, Marta." My voice cracked against the walls of the ICU. She stood unnaturally still by bed 7, her hands limp at her sides, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her lips kept moving with his, synchronizing perfectly with each rasp. "Confess." I grabbed her shoulders, shook her hard enough that her ID badge slapped against my wrist. Snap out of it, no reaction. Her gaze didn't even flicker toward me. It was as if she were hollowed out, her voice box borrowed. The patient's chest rose with the ventilator. As it fell, both of their mouths whispered again. "Confess, Bug." That name in her mouth twisted my stomach. The monitor screamed with my heart rate, every line jagged and unstable. My knees nearly buckled. I wanted to tell myself this wasn't happening, that it was exhaustion, mass hysteria, some trick of the machines. But Marta's lips kept moving, her eyes locked on me like a mirror I couldn't shatter. "What do you want me to confess?" I demanded, fists tight on the bed rail. My voice was a rasp, louder than I intended. That I left the door open? That I was a coward when you died? That I hated you some days? The ventilator hissed, and with it came a single word, sharp as broken glass. "More." I staggered back, shaking my head. There isn't more. That's it. That's all there is. The condensation on the glass door bloomed in streaks. Letters formed slowly, dripping downward. LIAR. Marta gasped suddenly, a choked sound like someone breaking the surface of water. She collapsed into my arms, trembling, eyes darting around the room in confusion. What happened? I couldn't move. It was like he was inside me. I held her upright, my pulse pounding. "It's not you. It's me." Her face went pale. "Then what does it want?" Before I could answer, the patient's eyelids fluttered open again. Cloudy, gray, yet locked onto mine with unshakable focus. His lips shaped words with the vent's hiss, too soft for Marta to catch, but clear enough for me. The basement. Tell the truth. My breath caught, my stomach dropped into ice. Because I knew exactly what he meant. The basement. The word hit me like a fist. My grip on Marta's arm tightened until she winced. I forced myself to loosen, shaking my head. No, I muttered under my breath. Not that. Not here. The fluorescent lights buzzed, dimmed, then flared so bright I had to squint. The ICU walls seemed to stretch, the corners pulling wider, the air heavy with mildew that had no place in a hospital. I knew that smell. Damp concrete, rust, childhood secrets buried under dust. Marta tugged at my sleeve. "Doctor, what's happening?" Her voice was small, scared. I wanted to lie, to tell her it was a power surge, faulty wiring. But then the floor beneath bed 7 groaned, a deep wooden creak that didn't belong to tile. The patient's bed shuddered. The monitor behind him flickered, static blooming across the screen, before resolving into crude letters. Basement. My breath shortened. I could almost feel the cold concrete under my bare feet, the way it had stung in winter when I was a boy sneaking down there against my father's rules. The jar of lightning bugs on the workbench. The hammer I wasn't supposed to touch. The sound it made when it slipped from my hands. I stumbled back, palms pressed to my temples as if I could block it out. "It wasn't my fault," I whispered. "I was a kid." The patient's lips parted. His voice rode the ventilator like a wave. "Say it." Marta shook me, panic in her eyes. "Say what? What does he mean?" The walls around us seemed to sweat, condensation dripping in rivulets. The air grew colder. For a moment, the ICU wasn't an ICU anymore. It was a basement cinder block walls, shelves lined with jars. The workbench where I'd stood trembling while my father towered over me. "Don't leave the door open, Bug. You'll let the dark in." My vision blurred. My throat burned. I didn't mean to. I swear, I didn't mean to. The word scrawled itself across every monitor in jagged, glitching lines. LIAR. The patient's body convulsed, restraints straining, as if something inside him was trying to claw its way out. His eyes rolled white, but his mouth moved, and my father's voice came out stronger than ever. "Tell her what you did, Bug." Marta's fingers dug into my arm. "Doctor, what is he talking about?" The basement walls in my memory closed in. I could still hear the thud, the cry, the silence that followed. And for the first time in 30 years, I knew I couldn't outrun it any longer. The air in the ICU thickened until every breath scraped like glass. My chest heaved, but it wasn't the hospital I smelled anymore. It was the basement, damp, metallic, stale with secrets. The monitors crackled. Their lines jittered and warped into crude, childlike scrawls. "Tell IT." Marta shook me again, her voice sharp with fear. "Doctor, what did you do down there?" I wanted to deny it, to bury it again. But the patient's lips moved, and my father's voice poured through the tube, too loud to ignore. "You dropped it, Bug. You dropped the hammer." The memory snapped open like a wound. I was 9, barefoot on the basement concrete, chasing fireflies I tried to keep alive in a jar. My father had left his tools on the workbench hammer, nails, the smell of oil. I'd climbed up to grab the jar, my hand brushing the hammer's handle. It slipped. The sound it made when it fell still rattles in my bones, heavy, sharp, final. It landed on my father's foot when he came storming down the stairs after me. The crunch, the scream, then silence. His face twisted with pain and fury. He shoved me aside, limped to the chair, and for hours his breath came ragged, angry, pained, and I had run. Left the door open, left him in the dark. Days later, the infection set in. The limp turned to fever, the fever to something worse. Pneumonia claimed him before the antibiotics ever had a chance. And I had always wondered if it began there with my clumsy hand and a hammer I wasn't supposed to touch. I collapsed against the bed rail, sobs tearing out of me. I didn't mean to. I was just a kid. The ventilator hissed, shaping the word with precision. Liar. The lights above flickered and went black. Emergency red bathed the ICU in a blood-colored glow. Every monitor sensed again, jagged lines spelling the same word over and over. Guilty. Marta backed away, her face ghost-pale, eyes darting between me and the patient. Is this true? She whispered. I pressed both hands to my face, the memory searing hot. I didn't kill him. I didn't. But my voice cracked. I left him. I let him suffer alone. The room vibrated with the sound of my father's voice, deep and endless, echoing through every vent and machine. You left the door open, Mug, and the dark came in. Silence. The red emergency glow dimmed, and for a moment, I thought the power had failed completely. But the machines were still lit, monitors still scrolling. Only now they were muted, their beeps swallowed, their alarms gagged. The IQ was moving, but soundless, as if someone had pressed a hand over the world's mouth. My breath came ragged, loud in my own ears, Marta's too sharp, panicked gulps. She pressed her back to the glass wall, eyes darting, her lips shaping words I couldn't hear. Even she had been swallowed by the silence. I turned to the bed. The patient's chest rose and fell with the ventilator, but the hiss had vanished. No exhale, no inhale, just motion. His lips moved anyway, silently forming shapes I didn't want to read. Bug, confess. I stumbled closer, my heartbeat roaring in the void. No, I whispered. My voice sounded like it didn't belong to me, foreign and small. Not again. The condensation on the glass walls trickled, slow and deliberate, spelling words that gleamed in the crimson glow. You let him die. My knees buckled. I clutched the rail for balance, tears stinging my eyes. The memory of the basement pressed tighter, the hammer slipping, the scream, the hours I hid, afraid of what I'd done, afraid of him. And the day the fever took him, the way I prayed, wasn't my fault, even as the guilt rooted deep. I wanted noise, anything to break the suffocating stillness. A siren, a code alarm, Marta's voice. Instead, the silence pulled tighter, pressing on my chest like a weight. I realized, with a spike of terror, that I couldn't hear my own pulse anymore. I pressed trembling fingers to my neck. Nothing. My heart was moving. I felt it, but there was no sound. Not even inside me. The patient's eyes fluttered open, gray and milky. His lips moved again, more urgently this time. Marta lurched forward, her eyes wide with horror, pointing at me. She mouthed a word I could finally read. Listen. The silence cracked, just slightly. Not with sound, but with presence. A whisper slid into the gap, deep, ragged, and unmistakable. My father's voice. You never closed the door, Bug, and now it's open for you. The monitors lit up, every screen flashing the same word in jagged green text. Drown. The first drop hit my shoe. Cold, black, seeping from beneath bed 7, as if the floor itself had cracked open. I staggered back, gripping the rail, as the liquid spread in a thin sheet across the tiles. It smelled of mildew and iron, the basement smell, thick and choking. Marta screamed, though her voice sounded distant, muffled, like it was trapped underwater. Doctor, it's flooding. The black water rose quickly, lapping at our ankles and our knees. The machines didn't short, didn't spark. They just kept glowing, their screens steady, tracing words in green phosphor that shimmered against the reflection of the water. Bug, drown, confess. I tried to haul Marta toward the door, but the glass wouldn't budge. I slammed my shoulder into it, rattled the handle, but it stayed locked, fogging with condensation. On the other side, the corridor had dissolved into shadow, stretching endlessly. No nurses, no life. The water climbed to my waist. My chest heaved. My lungs already felt heavy, as though they knew what was coming. The patient in bed 7 rose slightly against the restraints, head turning toward me. His lips moved in perfect time with the ventilator's silent cycle. "You left me alone? You let the dark in? Now breathe it." The water surged, knocking the stool over, sending it drifting like debris. Marta clutched my arm, her nails digging deep. "Do something," she cried, choking. "Please." I wanted to fight, to fix, to use my hands like I always had. But medicine had nothing for this. I could only stare as the monitors warped again, their jagged lines reshaping into a single sentence. "Your turn." The water surged over my chest, cold knives against my ribs. My throat seized. The memory of my father's rattling breaths filled my ears, his drowning on dry land, lungs filling with infection, each gasp sharper than the last. And then the water reached my mouth. I tried to hold my breath, but it forced itself in, cold and endless, pouring down my throat until I gagged. My body convulsed, lungs burning, vision blurring red. Marta's scream bubbled beside me, thin and helpless. The last thing I saw before the black swallowed me was bed 7's monitor, glowing brighter than all the rest. It no longer spelled bug. It spelled Daniel. Darkness pressed against my eyes until I was sure I was gone. Then light. Not the white of hospital fluorescence, but a pale, watery glow, like sunlight bent through a lake. I was standing, somehow breathing, though the air was thick and cold in my lungs. Around me stretched the ICU, but twisted, submerged. Beds floated weightless, their restraints swaying like kelp. The monitors still glowed, their green traces bending and curling like eels. Every patient was awake. Eyes wide, mouths opening and closing soundlessly. Their lips formed one word, again and again, bubbles streaming upward as they mouthed it. Daniel. I spun, searching for Marta. She was nowhere. Only me, and them, and the machines that pulsed like a single heart. Bed 7 loomed ahead, his frame half sunken into the black. He sat upright now, unbound, ventilator tubing, trailing like seaweed from his mouth. His eyes were gray voids, locked on mine. "You opened the door," he said, though the words slid into my ears without sound. "Now you can't close it." I stumbled back, nearly colliding with another bed. The patient inside, a man I'd pronounced dead weeks ago, turned his head toward me, bubbles streaming from his lips. "You let me drown, too," he whispered. Another joined in. A woman I'd coded last winter, her body pale and drifting. "You let me go." One by one, they all whispered voices of every patient I'd lost, their words threading together until the ICU sang with accusation. "You let us die. You let us die. You let us die." I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. The sound was inside me, vibrating my bones. "Stop," I cried. "I tried to save you. All of you. I did everything I could." Bed 7 rose, his feet finding purchase on the flooded floor as though it were solid. He stepped closer, his gray eyes glowing faintly. "You saved the living, but you never saved me." The words struck deeper than any accusation. My throat closed. My chest ached as if the black water had never left. "You're not my father," I said, voice cracking. His head tilted, his grin stretched too wide. "Then why do you know my voice?" The monitors around us flickered, their lines collapsing into a single message. "Confess." The drowned chorus swelled again. "Confess, confess, confess." And as the word filled the ICU, the walls bent and cracked. Water surged in through the fissures, rushing faster, pulling me off my feet. And this time, I knew where it would take me. Down. Into the basement. The water dragged me down, colder with every foot, until the glow of monitors vanished above. My lungs clenched, my chest aching, but when the blackness broke, it wasn't water I breathed. It was the damp air of the basement. Concrete walls, low ceiling, the hum of the freezer in the corner, rusty tools lined across a bench I hadn't seen since I was 9. The jar of lightning bugs sat there too, glowing faintly, their light dying slow. And on the floor lay the hammer. I staggered back, my shoes scraping the concrete, heart clawing at my ribs. The basement smelled exactly as it had then: oil, dust, mildew, and I knew this wasn't memory alone. It was something alive, a place waiting for me to finish what I had left undone. Behind me, footsteps, slow, heavy, familiar. Bug. The voice was my father's, steady and low, echoing off cinderblock. I turned. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, soaked to the bone, his face gray, eyes pale and unblinking. Water dripped from his hair, pooling at his feet, but he didn't move toward me. He only pointed at the hammer. Pick it up. My throat closed. No, I didn't mean to. I didn't want... Pick it up, he repeated. Louder, sharper. The air thickened. The fireflies in the jar winked out, one by one, plunging the room into deeper shadow. I bent, hand trembling, and lifted the hammer. Its weight burned into my palm like it remembered me. My father stepped closer, limp in his stride. His voice cut through the silence, commanding, "Say what you never said." The hammer grew heavier in my grip, pulling at my wrist. My chest ached with the words I had buried for decades. "I'm sorry," I whispered, voice cracking. "I was a kid. I didn't know. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to leave you." The shadows thickened. The fireflies were gone. Only my father's pale outline remained. "Not enough," he growled. His finger jabbed at the hammer. "Tell the truth." The basement shook. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The freezer hummed louder, and I felt the water rising again, seeping through the cracks in the floor. My pulse raced. I knew what he wanted. I knew what I had never dared admit, not to him, not even to myself. That part of me had wanted him gone. The hammer dragged my arm down until my wrist trembled under its weight. My father loomed in the basement shadows, dripping, gray, his eyes empty pits that burned with expectation. "Tell the truth," he hissed. My throat closed. The air was heavy with mildew, iron, and guilt. I wanted to say I'm sorry again, to repeat it until the words bled me dry, but I knew he wouldn't accept that. He never had. The truth clawed its way up, raw and jagged. "I hated you," I choked. My knees buckled, hammer slipping from my fingers to the concrete with a dull clang. I hated your anger. I hated the fear. I hated how small I felt every time you said my name, like it was a mistake. The basement walls shuddered. Water surged up through the cracks, climbing my legs, pulling me down. "I wanted you gone," I screamed, the words tearing out of me like glass. "I wished you would die and leave me alone." Silence. My father's pale figure stood perfectly still. The shadows swallowed his features until he was nothing but outline, dripping, waiting. Then he smiled. It was small, crooked, the smile he gave me once when I'd fixed something without breaking it first. "You finally said it," he whispered. The water surged to my chest, my throat, my mouth. I gasped, lungs filling with the river of guilt I damned for decades. My body convulsed, vision blurring, the basement ceiling tilting. The last thing I saw was my father turning, limping back into the dark, his smile faint and endless. And then the water claimed me. They found me hours later on the ICU floor, collapsed beside bed 7. Marta said I hadn't been breathing, as she pounded my chest until I sputtered back to life. But even as air filled me again, I knew it wasn't mine anymore. Every breath since carries the weight of water. The hiss of the ventilator follows me into sleep, and sometimes in the dark, I hear it again, my father's voice, soft, steady. Don't leave the door open, Lug. You'll let the night in.